In this presentation, we're going to add our credit card bank fee data into our financial system. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Online. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We're going to start off, of course, by opening up our reports by going to the tab down to below to the left. We're going to start off opening up the balance sheet report. We're going to be changing the dates up top in the balance sheet report from January. Let's make it all the way to December 31, 20. Run that report. I'm going to right click on the tab up top. We're going to duplicate that tab, setting up our standard process here. Back to the tab to the left, going back to the reports at the bottom, opening up the P&L, the profit and loss, the income statement this time. We're going to be changing the dates up top to the same range as balance sheet, ending at 12/31/20. We're going to run that report. I'm going to duplicate the tab by right clicking on that tab up top and duplicating that tab up top. And then I'm going to go back to the tab to the left. We're now going to go to the banking information where we had imported our credit card information. Then we're going to close that old hamburger to get it out of the way, and we have our information down below. Now you'll note that it's going to be a very similar kind of process with our bank feeds for our bank accounts at this point. We need to accept this information into the system. So note if I hit this little cog down here, we have this one down below I just want to focus in on where it says show bank detail. Like this one might be defaulted off. And then again, if you have something like that shows up a little funny, QuickBooks is kind of trying to decide what the best description will be. If you turn this on, I think it's kind of better, even though you'll get a long description, because it'll give you exactly what came from the bank feeds, which can be a lot of information. If you get it from the bank, because they could add a lot more details and numbers and whatnot, and in some cases you might be able to find those things to be useful to help you to set up things like rules. So, and we'll talk more about rules maybe in a future presentation. So here we have it. Now we have the payment that we made first off. So the first one was the payment, and then we have all of our expenses. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the expenses. We just added some expenses. To get used to it. It'll be a similar kind of process to add them as was with the bank feeds for the bank account. Now the first thing I want to note that is a little funny here is that obviously when we pay off the credit card, when we make a payment, let's say we made this $250 on the credit card. Well, we made it most likely out of our checking account, right? We made a checking account payment for the credit card to, let's say, American Express, and that's going to hit both this item on the bank feeds as a payment that was made, and it's going to also hit the bank account. So we're going to have two bank feeds that are going to be feeding up this information. It's going to be duplicated then in some sense. So it's right on this side. This is right? But it's also going to be on the bank feeds for the bank statement. And we didn't put it on for the example problem, but just note that you would have it on the bank statement for the bank feed. So we'll show an example of what to do on that. But so what are we going to do here on this side? We could take this and say it should go to the other side of this transaction, the other side of this transaction go into the checking account. But again, it might duplicate things in that sense. And then when we go to the checking account, hopefully we can match that transaction. But it could get a little bit messy. We could end up with a double duplicated information there. The other thing we might do is we might set up kind of a clearing account for it to go into the credit card account here. So in other words, we made a payment. The other side, instead of us decreasing the checking account, we put it to the clearing account, right? And then when I go to the checking account and we have the payment that was paid out of the checking account, decrease in the checking account, I put the other side there to the clearing account. And then the clearing account will zero back out once both of the bank fee transaction processes have processed through. That's kind of the most complicated component here. Let's just see how that might work. I'm gonna assign an account here. And I'm going to pick up the account, and I'm going to call it a credit card clearing account. So it should be zero after the payment and the charges have been entered through the bank feeds, in other words. I'm going to set it up as an other current liability type of account. So it's going to be an other current liability. I don't really want to set it up as a credit card because I don't want to mix it up with the bank feed information. So I'm going to put it as a other current liability. It's going to be called credit card clearing. I don't really need this one too much. I'm just going to put other current liability here and no subcategory. You could put it in a subcategory of the credit card, like make a parent account for credit card and then subcategory of the clearing account underneath it, which could be useful, but I'm not going to do that here. we're going to say save and close. So that one's going to go to this clearing account. If I then add it, I'm going to say, okay, let's add it and see what happens. Then I'm going to go back to the balance sheet and see what happens there. I'm going to refresh the screen on it. And then if I scroll back down and we take a look at the liabilities, here we have the credit card is now at the $750, because if I go into it, we see the detail of the transaction that we entered. If I go back to the original data, notice this got entered as of 2017, and that was in our data input, and it should be 2020. So I used an old, the dating system from an old worksheet. So how can we fix that? Let's take a look at it. Let's use that and think about how we can fix it here. And when I give you the data input sheet, I'll change this, of course, to 2020, so you don't have to do this fixing process. But let's take the opportunity to fix it. I can go to the balance sheet here, and I can look at that transaction. I'm going to take this back to 2017, and I'm going to run this report. It's still not showing up. Something apparently got really messed up with the date field here. So again, we'll fix that when it gets to you. But I'm going to run it from 01/01/1900 to 12/31/17 and run that report. And so here we finally have it. For some reason, it went in there on 4/1/1945, which is quite unusual. So we're going to go ahead and adjust that then. I'm going to say, all right, let's go into that 250. And then I'm going to change this to, 2020. So there we have it. And so then I'm going to say save and close. So then if I go back into here and I make the dates 01/01/20 to 12/31/20 and run that report. So there it is in the proper time frame, the 1000 minus the 250, bringing us down to the 750. And then I'm going to scroll back up top. The other side of it then is going to go into that clearing account. So the clearing account is going to be here in the other current liabilities at the 250. Now, when we make the payment out of the checking account, we'll decrease the checking account up top with the bank feeds, and we'll post the other side to the clearing account, which will make it go back down to 0. So once we have the two processes from the two bank feeds, it'll go back down to 0. Okay, let's go back to the bank feeds on the left. Now, how could I change these dates here? You may need to change these dates, or there could be some circumstances where you think that, they got the date wrong or something like that in the date field. Or if you're looking at bank feeds from the bank account, you might try to say, hey, I'd like to change the date to the date that we actually wrote the check. If there's some kind of timing difference that's going to be resulting at the end of the month, you might want to pull the check into the date period it was written and look for those timing difference items in them. So how can you change the date before you input it into the system? Obviously, as we saw, we can input it into the system, then change the date. But you also have an option over here. If you select this little cog and you go down, we want to enable date field. And that means we can actually change the date. Now, again, you want to be careful with this because obviously the date that's showing here is the date that is on the bank statement. But again, if you want to put the date that you wrote to the check rather than when it cleared, you might use this. So I'm going to just change these to 2020. So I'm going to add that. And I think I posted it to uncategorized, so we'll actually see that when I go over there, and then we'll have to adjust that one. I'm going to make this go to 2020, so 2020. So there we have that. I'm going to go to this one before we add it and make it go to 2020, so I don't forget this. I'm going to go to this one and make it go to 2020, and then we'll do it here from 17 to 2020, so we can adjust the date field from this screen before we add it there. Okay, so then I'm going to go back up top and let's just take a look at these one by one. Frank Grill, I'm going to copy the vendor tab up top and put that in the vendor section. So I'm going to put that here. And then it is already going to meals and entertainment. I'm going to say that's right. If it was for personal information, personal meals, then you should put it to the draws account or some type of equity account. I'm going to add the vendor, so we're going to save the vendor, and then I'll add that item. Next one is going to be Amazon, so I'm going to select Amazon. And the payee is there. We don't have a category. I'm just going to make it go to office supplies. And again, Amazon is one of those items where we might have, different places that it's going to be allocated to. The dollar amount is not really high, so I'm not thinking it's equipment. So I'm going to put it to the office supplies. Then I'm going to add that similar kind of saving option down here where it's going to try to save some of our transactions and recognize them as we do this. So the second time we did the credit card, then it should be easier. So I'm going to add that. Then we have the Verizon. So that's going to be the phone bill. And I know I repeated some of these expenses, so just to give an example of the credit card. So a Verizon, I'm going to type the telephone over here as the account. And again, it should memorize this next time we go into it. So I'm going to say add that. Next we have Edison. So if we had the Edison and we were paying it through the credit card, we would have the vendor and then the category. I'm going to put that to utilities. And you might ask, why isn't it memorizing these categories from the prior data input? Because we didn't put those into the credit card. So if we now start to pay them with the credit card all the time, it should then start to memorize those transactions. And then we have the Office Depot. So Office Depot in the vendor, I'm going to put that to office supplies expense again. And I'm going to add that one. And then we have the Verizon. So I'm going to go into Verizon. And I'm going to be saying that that's going to the telephone. It's already set up for us. Notice it's recognized it already. So I'm going to say that looks good. Add that. I'm not going to create the rule for it at this time. Utilities, it recognized it already as well. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead and add that. And so I'm not going to set up a rule for it at this time. It'll keep on giving us that green information, hopefully, that we can then simply add it just to give me a double check at this point. Then if I go back to the balance sheet, and I refresh the balance sheet up top. So I'm going to refresh the balance sheet. Let's close up the old hamburger, hold down Control, scroll up to that 125, and then I go down to the liability section. So now we have the credit cards at the 1663. Now, remember, we put some transactions because we're imagining we got transactions that were past the date of the end of the credit card statement of April. So we put some information in May because obviously if we're downloading directly from the credit card, there wouldn't be that line as of the end of the date as we would with the bank or the reconciliation or the reporting, the credit card report. So if we were to draw the line as of 04/30/20 here, so 04/30/20, and run that report, then this is where we would be as of the end of the credit card date, 1,250. If I go back to the credit card statement, we're at the 1,250 as of the end of April 30th. And again, we put some more data in there after April 30th. Let's go back up top, and the other side would obviously be on the P&L in a similar fashion as with the bank feeds. The other thing I just want to touch on is now what would we do with this clearing account here? Notice in the bank feeds, the other side we would make a payment, right? So I'm going to enter that directly into the register just so we would see it. It would pop up in the bank feeds, but let's put it in the register right now. So I would open up our data here. I'm going to hold down Control, scroll down just a bit, and we're going to go down to the accounting. And then I'm going to go to the chart of accounts, and we're going to open up the checking account. So open up the checking account, and we're going to pretend this came through with the bank feeds, but we'll just enter it into the register. Let's say we have an expense that's going to happen here. I'm going to make it as of 04. Let's make it a lot later because we'll be messing with the dates a little bit later. So let's make it as of 06. Just note that generally the date would have been before the date on the bank statement, so it would have been the payment would have had happened sometime probably in March with regards to this 250, which would show up on April. I don't want to put it back in March because I don't want to mess up the data that we had input from the prior system with the bank reconciliation. So I'm just going to put it kind of out in the future, out of the way, just so you can show how this clearing process will work. We'll also see this again from the other side of things after we make a payment for this month's time period. So you can see this process again because we're going to have this 1,250 due, and then we'll think about paying part of it like 500 of it, resulting in an outstanding balance. So we'll write the check, which will then show up in the next statement, which will be in May. 01 20. And let's say we're going to be paying the credit card. So it's going to say American Express, let's say. Add the vendor. And then we have the payment of the 250. Now the other side, instead of going to the credit card liability account, we're going to go to the credit card clearing account. Right? So it's going to go to and then it'll match up. So I'm going to say save that item. And that would obviously, again, process through with the bank feeds. So then if I go back to the balance sheet and I have the dates up to 12/31, the clearing account, after processing both the payment and the amount from the credit card statement into the clearing account, will then close that amount out. So then if we go down to the credit card clearing and we double click on it, it'll refresh then. Here's the amount that happened from the credit card statement. Here's the expense amount. That brings us back down to 0. So again, if I go back up to the report, it should show a 0 now because it will be refreshed. So I'm going to go back to the balance sheet. And then I scroll back down and we have the credit card clearing is now at 0. So when you have kind of things where there's one side happening like on the credit card statement, and then the other side is going to be on the bank statement, and they're both going to have bank fee transactions, setting up a clearing account so those both transactions, the other side of them, can wash out in the clearing account can be a useful tool.